go, guys.
All right, cool. All right, so guys, we've got AIKA in the house, AIKA Stephenson, our very first guest on MAN'S DEM CHAT, you know. So, AIKA,
First lady.
you know. A quick background, you know, obviously you might tell by the surname, we're family. AIKA's my niece, but more like a little sister, really, because the age gap's not that big still. So AIKA's been doing law for since what, 2006?
Yeah, I've been qualified since then.
Yeah, she's very humble, so she doesn't really like the bigging up thing. But she also won Young Solicitor of the Year in 2007, and then she wanted to win the actual main legal aid lawyer of the year in 2018. Am I right, Wiz?
Yeah, I think so.
She also runs her own charity called Just for Kids. Yeah, so over to you, AIKA. Welcome. Yeah.
Okay, so really, my uncle asked me to come and talk a bit about what I do and the kind of issues that I see that are affecting Black children and young people, and obviously Black men as also in turn. So I thought I'd just explain a bit about my background and my career to this point, and why I'm actually have the ability to talk about this kind of stuff, and then I can talk about sort of any issues really that people are interested in discussing, that sort of arise from the criminal justice system, anything that you're interested in really. So my career really started, or probably my interest in the law started when my dad went to prison when I was 10. That was probably the first time that I could remember quite significantly. And it was at that time that I decided that I wanted to be a lawyer, probably, you know, because I just wanted to get him out of prison, but really, but, you know, at that point, I just decided that I was going to be a solicitor, and it was something that I was determined to see through, and eventually I'm glad that I finally did. And then I, so kind of between the ages of 15 and 17, me and my sister lived by ourselves, essentially, because my dad went to prison again. That was another significant moment in terms of deciding how I wanted to practice. And that was like during that time, I really realised that children and young people actually can have a lot to say about their future. So that started kind of me beginning to form a strong idea of working with young people who were facing issues. Then in the year 2000, I think, I got my first job in the criminal justice system, which was at Feltham Young Offenders Institute. It wasn't as a solicitor. I'd finished law school, but I'd not done my legal training. So my job was to advocate for young people who had been remanded in custody. And at that time, nobody kind of knew that they were there. Lots of the services weren't joined up. People were being remanded by magistrates' courts without anyone knowing, and their solicitors weren't necessarily very good at trying to get young people out on bail. So I worked there for about a year before then deciding to join a youth offending team, where I worked for 3 years. So the youth offending team, if anyone doesn't know, is basically like the probation service for children. So I would work as a bail and remand officer. So I'd offer packages for young people to be released on bail at court, and then I would supervise them on those packages. And through that, I really began to see, so the prison system was kind of the first eye-opener, because I saw how damaged young people became so quickly within just a couple of days of being in custody. And that kind of made me think that I really needed to work in the youth justice system. And then when I started working in the youth offending team, I could see that all of the young people that were coming through the doors had similar issues. So they were all excluded from school, had mental health issues, had undiagnosed educational issues, things like autism, ADHD that hadn't been picked up during their school education. Loads of them were looked after children. And so I kind of really was trying to work out how I could practice as a criminal solicitor, but take a more holistic approach to that. So eventually I met Shawnee Lamb, who I set up the organisation Just for Kids Law with, who was a lawyer who'd been working in America. She was a barrister, and she was pretty jaded with the traditional approach to law that we took in this country, although she trained here. And she'd been doing death penalty work, and so we decided to set something up that was different for, you know, the way that we'd represent young people. So we set up a not-for-profit organisation that not only did direct representation, but also provided a number of services around that. And then we also took legal challenges that changed the law for young people, for all young people, rather than just focusing on individual cases. So we took a legal case to challenge the law relating to appropriate adults in police stations, for example. So previously 17-year-olds weren't allowed to have an appropriate adult in the police station. They weren't their parents didn't need to be told that they were there, and they were kind of treated as an anomaly because they weren't 18, so they weren't adults, they weren't 16, so clearly children. And so there was just this space that they were just kind of an anomaly in the system. So we changed the law so that every child now is able to have an appropriate adult at 17. We also intervened in a case that was taken around joint enterprise. So we challenged the law of joint enterprise, which leads to 3 times more Black men being convicted on joint enterprise. But I can explain more about that later on if people don't really understand it. It's quite a complex area of law. But we also intervened in the case that was going to the High Court to ensure that that was changed because of the disproportionate impact on Black children being convicted under joint enterprise. There's other things we've done around children with special educational needs being given intermediaries in court. So yeah, but in a nutshell, I practice as a criminal solicitor. I now have done for 16 years, continue to represent children and young people in the courts. I mean, I say young people, but I have got some clients who seem to have aged with me. So I represented them when they were 14 I assisted them when they were 14 at the youth offending team, and sadly I'm still assisting them now and they're close to 30. But most of them yeah, their life takes a different turn at some point, and I don't have to keep dealing with them. But yeah, so I do adult crime, but essentially the law is pretty much the same in relation to adults and children. It's just how the process you go through and the potential disposals in terms of children are less likely to be sent to prison, or certainly less quickly. But we've done a lot of work as an organisation around the disproportionate impact of the criminal justice system on Black children, which obviously conversely affects Black men. So the same issues that would affect children around stop and search, and Black men being 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched than their white counterparts. Black men and boys being more likely to be restrained. I know, I'm sure you experienced this, so I don't have to tell you. Those kind of statistics follow through into every part of the criminal justice system. So Black men are more likely to be restrained, and children, and also tasered. When there is an arrest, the Lammy Review did quite a lot of work into looking into this. The only area that they found that there wasn't a disproportionate impact was in terms of Black men being actually charged. But the problem was once in the criminal justice system, then the issues arise again, and significantly more Black men are remanded in custody, given custodial sentences. In relation to drugs offences, significantly more. It's something ridiculous. Like, I think the Lammy review found that it was like 200% more likely to be given a custodial sentence for a drug offence than their white counterparts. We took a case to the Court of Appeal, which involved two boys, both 18, who had been selling drugs at a festival. And what was ironic, it was actually their head teacher had been made aware that they had both been arrested at this festival, and they were both due to go off to university. One boy, white middle-class boy, was given a community order. My client, who hadn't even told his mum was in court, was given a 3-year custodial sentence. I wasn't the solicitor at the time, but we took the case on appeal and highlighted the disproportionate impact and actually quoted the Lammy review in the case. And whilst the Court of Appeal did not specifically state that they had accepted that the decision was racist, they said that they felt that our client's personal circumstances hadn't adequately been taken into consideration and reduced his sentence, which resulted in his release. So there are things, there are things we can do that we can do through the legal system and by holding organisations to account. So I'm not just here to depress you, but yeah, essentially, I mean, the issues that I find that I'm dealing with now at the moment, I don't do actions against the police. So when my clients experience issues with stop and search and restraints, I'd refer them on to other organisations that deal with that. But the issues that I am dealing with on a day-to-day basis that are affecting Black children are school exclusion. It's a massive issue in terms of the disproportionate number of children who are excluded from school. A lot of my clients have been excluded because of behaviour issues, which through our work, psychological assessment, we have found that they actually have significant mental health disorders such as autism, which is sort of, the way that children with autism see the world is entirely different and sort of lifelong. And so that has had a massive impact on their learning and the fact that they're in the criminal justice system in the first place. I'm doing a lot of work with young people affected by county lines. So loads of children who have been essentially groomed and exploited, and it won't be groomed in the traditional sense that people might think, but it's young people who are almost being they're treated as family. It's quite a subtle way that young people are being sort of drawn into county lines drug dealing and used in that way. And I'm also dealing with a lot of children with mental health issues. Essentially, that's kind of my work and what I do, and I'm happy to take any questions on any of the issues that I've raised.
So would you find at the moment that the children dealing with a lot of mental health issues, is that on the rise, would you say? Yeah, definitely. And there's also a real lack of services for children. So the wait for child and adolescent mental health is about 18 months. I'm sure Uncle Mark can tell. Sorry, I have to call him Uncle Mark even in this setting. I'm sure he can tell. He knows what the situation is for the adults, but I just think, the whole system is completely saturated.
Do you think that the criminal justice system was built to marginalise and subdue and control Black people then?
whether it was built for it, that's certainly what it's doing. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Covertly.
I mean, I have this debate all the time as to whether you can really change whether you have to be in something in order to create change, or whether you should be doing it from the outside. And I think that the only way for me to actually make any changes to be working in the system, but it is quite hard, because you find yourself kind of totally beaten down by it sometimes.
Yeah.
AIKA.
So the journey must have been. Sorry, go on, Paul.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. I want to start by commending you and giving you honours for the work you're doing.
Yeah,
Thanks.
for real.
It's really needed. You know? So my thing is, so there was a race disparity audit done. I think it was 2016, and then it was updated in 2018, which was supposed to address the disparity between the treatment between ethnic minorities and their counterparts. Are you saying that that hasn't had any impact whatsoever? Because what they outlined, all public services and institutions are supposed to be adhering to it to try and bridge the gap.
Yeah, no, I don't think those things have been able to take effect yet. I have seen that there is actually, quite depressingly, what seemed to have created most change is George Floyd. That has what has created most change within the system, and I think people have started to say, look, all of these, we knew this before and nothing's been done, so what's going to be done? Because in the past year, I have been asked to speak at multiple events. I've been asked to contribute to anti-racist lawyer guides. I've been asked to speak to the judiciary. I've spoken to magistrates. So there is definitely a massive move now to actually look at this issue. I was on a steering group last year for the Inspectorate of Probation and Youth Offending Teams, because they were doing an inspection and looking at whether the outcomes were different for Black and mixed race children that were supervised by youth offending teams. And yeah, you know, the outcome was awful. You know, those young people, unless they were in a youth offending team that was based in Lambeth, which had a significant proportion of Black staff who could deliver sort of programs in a culturally competent way, then people were scoring really badly in terms of the outcomes for those young people. So I think that it's quite clear that nothing has changed immediately. We've certainly not been able to see the benefit of any of that change, but there has certainly been a lot of awareness and education and a lot of call into account and things that we can refer to, studies that have been done, research that has been done, you know, by some of the public bodies. So now in the sentencing guidelines, now they specifically state that they look at the outcomes for Black people in custody. So it specifically states in the sentencing guidelines that basically it's almost like a call on the magistrates or the judges to check themselves before sentencing. And obviously any good lawyer is going to refer to the sentencing guidelines. Now, some of that is, you can be met with sort of challenge. I was part of creating an anti-racist lawyer guide that then was circulated to sort of the legal profession. And some lawyers had, we can upload things to a digital system when we make representations in the Crown Court. And so I had uploaded that specifically because the boys being sentenced were Black, for the judges. And one of my colleagues has had a good experience where a judge has said that was very helpful. But the judge in my particular case basically said, I don't know why somebody has uploaded a 40-page document telling me not to be racist. We've all been trained. So whilst he clearly wasn't very happy that I was kind of trying to hold them accountable in that way. It's certainly whatever way he wants to frame it, he has to check himself. So I think that we didn't have those tools before. The LAMI review also is another document you can use that you can specifically refer to, but it's about the legal profession being bold in doing that. But I think that there is certainly a change in people kind of taking that approach.
Do you actually represent people who are, say, in the prison system as well? Probably not. You don't, do you? It's a different. No,
because prison lawyers have, that's a different area.
Yeah.
So I'm a criminal lawyer, and the only thing that I will do in relation to people already in prison is appeals. But if it's a prison law issue, then they need a prison lawyer.
The government is complaint driven, right? So, and I guess in all walks of life, if you don't say anything, if you don't complain, if you don't make your voice heard, it's assumed everything's cool, right? So what can we do in general, dealing with public services and institutions, to highlight these things? You know, what can we do really to really complain and highlight and try and make a change?
Do you mean before you've been affected by an issue?
No, just
I think in any situation, it's about knowing your rights, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
I think whatever the situation, before you, if you have any kind of issue with a public service, it's about knowing your rights, and it's about doing a bit of research first. So whether that's, you know, the housing office at the council, as you know, dealing with a schools issue for one of your children, it's about looking at, you know, what information is on their website. There's so much information out there. It's just about finding that information and kind of arming yourself with it before you even go into one of these situations.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned,
we refer to the race disparity audit and the LAMI review to sort of highlight certain things that we're noticing. You draw on the document, almost the documents that are already in their system. So, you know, so obviously the Inspectorate for Probations and Youth Offending Teams, you know, they have to publish these reports. They have to publish all of these damning reports. They're all there. It's just about people understanding that they have access to that information, and also you, as you know, as an individual, you have the ability to make a freedom of information request if it specifically relates to information about you. So there is actually, because of, you know, laws around privacy and data protection, there's actually that you can actually get a lot of information.
Would it be on the website? Will it be on online information and stuff like that? You can search for it online, can you? Or
sorry, would what be online?
Can you search for information online? Or
the .gov website, believe it or not, has a significant amount of information. You know, obviously you know, it can be, you know, you have to take some of it with a pinch of salt because they frame things in a certain way. But yeah, there's
Would you say, as like you said earlier about being on the inside and affecting change from the inside rather than the outside, would you say, I mean, as a black woman, you obviously done great and you must have gone through things to be where you are now. But are we disproportionately represented within the criminal justice system? I mean, lawyers, judges.
Yeah, judges, not as much, definitely not. There are a significant proportion of black lawyers, and more so, and women. But yeah, in the judiciary, and Queen's Counsel, yeah, much less. And to be honest, I've been in front of 2 black female judges both of them were awful.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I'm not, you know, it's like people talk about, you know, representation, but it has to be the right kind of representation. Exactly. And I've been in Luton Crown Court and Wood Green Crown Court, and in both, and in front of black women. And I remember thinking at the start of the case, okay, this is good. Huh?
Barbara Mensah, she's hardcore.
Yes, she is one of the people that I'm talking about. Yeah. Awful woman, to be honest. And she was 10 times harder on my client.
What was her name? Sorry, what did you say her name was?
Barbara Mensah.
Barbara Mensah.
Yeah, she set one of my clients down for aggressive begging, even though we explained the whole mental health situation and what he was going through and stuff. She wasn't having an iota. And the strange thing about that, when we went to court, there was not a white person in the court. Every single person in the court was black, from the judge to the prosecution to the defense to the lady taking the notes, the usher, the security guard, everyone. There was a white person. It was quite a surreal experience. But she threw the book at him anyway. And when I went back to work and told my manager that he had gone down to prison, man, she was absolutely in shock. She couldn't believe what had happened. And then she started to fuss me and telling me, oh, didn't you do this? Didn't you say that? I said, yeah, I said all of that. I said everything. And she still wasn't having none of it.
Well, I mean, even in the mental health system as well, there's a lot of black people in the mental health system.
Yeah,
and they have the same mentality as well. It's like you know, they're working against you as a black person. You know, it's like if they can't relate to you.
Sometimes
so I keep saying to myself, where is the representation? They look like me, but where is the representation? You know what I'm saying? It doesn't make sense. It just baffles me.
Yeah, definitely.
You know? And when I had a black, I had you know, black solicitors or whatever. You have to pick. Sometimes you pick them, and before you know, it's too late to change or whatever, to find someone suitable. Because you know, it's very hard to find someone suitable, whether it's black or white or whatever. It's very difficult to find someone suitable because they all could be working against you. You just don't know. It happened to me with a black solicitor.
How
did you detect?
They're just representing. They're just basically representing you in a basic way. You know?
Was that Curtis?
Right. Yeah. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Right. How much force can a police officer actually use? Reasonably use, like their reasonable force that they quote the same that they can use.
Well, the thing is, it's fairly grey because obviously, it's just reasonable. Now, obviously, you know, we know what unreasonable looks like. So I think, so I would take issue with any of my clients who have a physical mark from their experience in custody. Now, handcuff marks can be quite difficult for a police action lawyer to take, but anything other than that, I think it's very, you know, it's very hard to argue that was reasonable. And the thing is, they're all supposed to have body-worn footage that they turn on now at an arrest, and so I think that it's important that if you're in a situation with a police officer, that you ask them specifically why they haven't turned on their body-worn footage, because that will be seen, you know, clearly, like very negatively by the courts. But
I've been cuffed by 2 officers that said I assaulted them, but they assaulted me. The one on my left, he put the cuffs on. He nearly broke my wrist. Yeah. So we ended up in the trial, and the judge asked him, how did he restrain me? He said he cuffed me, but he said that it was the way that they was taught, but a tweaked version. of how they were taught. The man nearly broke my wrist, AIKA. But at the end of the day, there was nothing I could do. He wasn't held accountable for that. This is the problem. So what do you think that racism is allowed, is like written in law, or is it the individual?
Well, I think it's the individual. I have to think it's the individual. Because otherwise, you know, then what would be the point of me?
Racism by definition is a group activity. So an individual cannot be a racist on his own. You'd have to be a group of people in order to be a racist.
Yeah, so obviously the police, you know, there is a culture of systemic racism in the police, but you have the ability. So I've represented people in the police station where, you know, I've dealt with an arrest that was clearly an arrest that is unlawful or that is based on race, a young person being racially profiled. And I have made that very clear to the interviewing officer. So I represented a boy who had been he was just riding down the street on an electric scooter. He was stopped by the police. He was stopped by a territorial support group who are basically the guerrillas of the police force who drive around in vans preying on people. And so he was stopped by them. He was obviously quite intimidated. They said that he was behaving suspiciously. They asked him to get back in the back of a van for a search. Whilst he was in the back of the van, they said, "Have you got anything on you that doesn't belong to you?" And he had picked up an Oyster card that he'd found on the floor, and he was it wasn't in his name, and he was planning to, if you give it in to London Underground, you can get £5 to return a lost oyster. So that's what he was going to do, to get £5 basically. And the officer said, "Oh, you know, this isn't in your name," and essentially, and the boy lied. He said, "Oh, it's my brother's," and then they called his brother on his mobile phone, and he said, "Oh no, that's not my name." Well, you know, long story, but anyway, so he ends up getting arrested for fraud by misrepresentation, and so we got to the police station. I think the custody sergeant thought it was a bit dodgy. Because he allowed, as soon as this boy's dad arrived, he allowed him to sit outside with his dad. He didn't put him in a cell at any point. And then went through the interview. I wrote a full statement explaining very clearly that clearly his stop was racially motivated. The fact that the approach that the police had taken, the fact that he was intimidated, and set this all out in a prepared statement. The boy, I told him to not speak in the interview at all. And the officer switched off the tape at the end of the interview, turned to my client, said, "I'm very sorry that you've had to experience this. I'm going to walk out of here and this is going to go in the bin." And the case was no further action. So that is what keeps me going, because there are those opportunities all of the time. If you call it out, it doesn't always work. Some officers aren't prepared to accept it. Sometimes you raise the issue of race, but I have enough of those experiences for it to feel like I am able to change the system by being in it.
Abdul,
I was in a meeting, when was it, on Sunday, a couple of Sundays ago, and there was a meeting about the same thing that we're talking about now, and it was about the criminal justice system and how racist the system is against black people and stuff like that. And there's this black female detective. I think she got promoted to something higher now, something way up in the sky. You know what I mean? And so she said that she has to be in it to make changes. And she says she's the first black female to be in such a position. But how many times have you ever heard of the first black this, the first black that? you'll never hear the end of it. It's always forever. It's going to be the same way. And the thing is as well, like you know, to be in such a high position, right? How can you make changes as a lone black person amongst a sea of the system of white supremacy? How can you make changes on your own like that? It's impossible. You have to go along with the majority. You have to, whether you like it or not. So when you're promoted into a high position, it's because you're following the system. You're following. You're pleasing the system, and you're acting the way they want you to act. So they promote you. They give you incentive to actually keep going along with the system. You can't make changes the higher up you go.
And the problem is with being promoted through those systems is that you just get further and further away from what's happening on the ground.
Exactly.
So we have conversations with people at that kind of level that talk about, say all of the right things in terms of how they're going to deal with the issue of disproportionality and, you know, the treatment of children in custody and all of the things that form part of my day-to-day work. But the problem is, the further they get away from it, the less able they are or in touch they are with actually what's happening in the custody suite. So it's actually about that filtering through to the custody suite, which is our biggest issue when speaking to the police about any of these things.
So what are your feelings towards the IPCC?
Well,
the only reason why...
I'm a police action solicitor, so it's really hard for me to... my clients have had good and bad experiences, so I couldn't say overall because it's not the work I do day to day. But I have had clients who have been who've taken actions against the police. Often those cases have been where there is clear evidence that it's completely undisputable. So I've had a client who had a recording of the police officer being racist, and so that client received kind of compensation of like £20,000. And so that was effective for him, but I know that there are lots of other people who've not had that same experience.
Given that the IPCC are former police officers investigating each other, and as we know, they are like, it's more like a gang culture and they all want to look after themselves. I'm very skeptical of how much investigating they're going to do in regards to interracial discrimination against especially young black ethnic minorities who do get arrested, for example, a stop and search, and it is escalated up into where they feel marginalized by their race in regards to white officers pulling them over all the time.
Yeah, I don't think the IPCC alone is going to give somebody a good service. I think they need to have a police action solicitor who is holding the IPCC to account in their investigation. I think that's the best, and that's what has been most successful, I think.
There was a comment made earlier on today about getting high up in wherever in criminal justice and effective change, and yet you have to kind of go with the system. I've been with Mark's fully aware. I've been with the criminal justice system for many years, and I was very disillusioned when I was working with the youth offending team and working with probation. I found going back to working in the prison custodial setting a lot better, and a managerial role and working with offenders in regards to, and to be very brutally honest, that I 100% believe, and this could spark controversy, that I do think the criminal justice system in regard to ethnic minorities is designed to fail. I found it working with black youths in the probation. I found it working in the YOS, especially the transitional period from when they were leaving the YOS going into probation.
Yeah.
Too much. Once they were working with YOS, they were very much pampered to. As soon as they went over to probation, it was a sharp shock, especially when it came to unpaid work. When they were at YOS, they were doing reparation when they were going, and as soon as they went to probation, it was like, you don't do it, breach, especially from the CRC companies.
Yeah, that's definitely the experience that I have in my work.
Can you just explain what these words are, like YOS and that's, you know.
Oh, the youth offending, the youth offending service. I found that many young people on my caseload were coming to the age of 18 and they were transitioning into going into YOS, they found that it was too traumatic, where their offender managers from, for example, like SEDEX, for example, the case managers over there wouldn't understand and wouldn't be using the same processes as they were in the YOS. For example, probation would use the database called Oasis, and we would use Asset Plus, a database that what I believe was just for covering your back in case a young person commit crime. They didn't need to corrugate and match up at all. I just found it a pointless method that never fed on to the offender management to actually support that young adult in their transition, in them in their rehabilitation culture. That wasn't coming across, and that's probably the reason why I left us, because I didn't see the transitional part. I didn't see the additional support that I need, that especially a young ethnic minority required, especially a young person going through school, or going for some sort of trauma, or they're autistic or so forth. There wasn't enough support there, and that is what I'm seeing day to day working in the prison setting, where these key parts of what's going on in their life hasn't been picked up.
Yeah, I think they've actually realised this and set up young adult teams in probation, but I think it's quite early days and I don't know how effective it's going to be. But because of that transition, because of the significant proportion of 18 to 25-year-olds that are, going through the system for the most serious offences.
Yeah, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I got arrested from false. I didn't realize that the police was following me, actually, because when I actually come out of a shop, they were following. I think the shop assistant must have actually called the cops on me for some reason. I don't know. They probably must have thought I shoplifted or something like that. And anyway, I went into the library, and next thing I know, the police officer was telling me to follow them outside or whatever. I didn't know what was going on. And anyway, they handcuffed me, and they handcuffed me so tight, I thought my wrist was going to break off. It was so painful. The bones was the cuff was in my bones. It was
that's tactical, isn't it? That's tactical. To do your wrist like
yes,
that.
It was so painful. I thought I was going to die. I was in so much pain. I can't understand how they could put something on you so tightly. Absolutely, they did it on purpose. I was screaming my head off. I was bawling. They just didn't want to know. I keep telling, it's too tight. They just did not want to know.
Sorry,
and they kept me in handcuff for about, I don't know what, at least until they got me to the destination, which was in Luton or whatever it was. And while they were driving, I thought I was gonna die. I was in so much pain. I couldn't believe the pain. How could someone be in so much pain and still be alive? That's what I was thinking.
I was going to say, in all the years you've worked as a solicitor, AIKA, have you seen police being held accountable for their action? Have you ever seen a police being fired off the force? I know people's probably been given compensation, but actually a solicitor being, fired off the course or so.
A police officer, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that case, that the officer was charged. It went to court. He had a trial by jury. Juries always acquit police officers, sadly. So he was acquitted, but through the disciplinary process in the police force, he was sacked.
Okay. How difficult is it to represent yourself in court? Do you have to have a certain amount of knowledge or to represent yourself in court? How difficult is that?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. I think if you are an articulate person who is able to, research.
I've had a friend who's done it basically, but he's not. I've had a friend who's done it, but he is not that articulate.
No, so I would never advise it. Because there will always be things that you don't know that
I represented myself.
Trap, isn't it?
I represent myself in court once.
It's a trap, though, isn't it? It's a setup.
Against a couple of police officers about an accident that they had against me, and I actually won.
Yeah, because my friend won.
Yeah, I think magistrates are, because of the cuts to legal aid, magistrates have to make the courts as accessible as they can because more people are unrepresented. So they have to give you an opportunity to speak. But yeah, when I've watched people self-representing, it's not often been a disaster, but I'm not, but you know, that's just my experience.
And as a solicitor, how have you detected like youngsters that have had mental health? Like how did you go about detecting that they had some sort of mental health?
Yeah, well, I've got a lot of personal experience, so in a way that, you know, because of the amount of time that I've been working with young people, but essentially as a matter of course, we pretty much have psychological assessments undertaken on most of our clients. Obviously there are some clients that that it's very clear that probably that a psychological assessment will conclude that they're actually very able, and that can work against you. So there are some that, but a significant proportion, as soon as their parents say they've needed help in school, or they needed they've had a teaching assistant, or they struggle with reading and writing, any little clue like that, you would get a psychological assessment. It's very easy to get to apply as a solicitor for funding. It's a lot quicker than child and adolescent mental health services. You can get authorization within 2 days to have a report. The only issue we've got is that you're waiting 6 to 8 weeks for child and adolescent psychologists and psychiatrists to be available. They have sort of, I know in the youth offending services, they've started to have in-house speech and language therapists, because they know that the social communication issues amongst young people in the criminal justice system are huge, but not every youth offending team's got one.
I've got my son that went to prison, yeah, my boy Amari.
Yeah.
And he got 6 years. He done 3.5, came out 2.5 years. He was on license for, yeah. So what happened is his house got raided. Police said that they were looking for a weapon, a firearm. Someone got shot. Because he was on license, he got a recall, yeah. So he got recalled back to prison. While he was in prison now, they said that there was no one shot, there was no gun to look for because there was no incident, no shooting. Yeah, they NFA'd him, no further action. They've still got my boy in there. He's been in there for how many months, and all charges have been dropped. And it seems like
he's got a prison lawyer to appeal the recall.
Of the parole board. So how can they keep him in if all charges have been dropped?
So they've got, license is really draconian, and they have this ability to detain people if they believe you've compromised your license in any way. And so an arrest is always considered you compromising your license. But if he should have, should take an appeal with a prison lawyer against the recall. If he hasn't done that, then he needs to.
Yeah, because he never committed a crime. They raided his house looking for a firearm.
Could get authority to see the warrant, to see the grounds upon which
on the warrant. Yeah, on the warrant, they was only supposed to be looking for a mobile phone, but they was looking for weapons. Told him about a shooting, arrested him, locked him up because he got recalled. All charges got dropped. There was no shooting. There's no charges of anything. They've still got my boy in prison. He's done nothing wrong.
Without legal representation, he will
nothing.
stay there. He needs to get a prison lawyer.
AIKA, obviously, especially the youth, we don't really get educated in how to deal with the justice system, how to talk to police, how to represent ourselves. So what books or references would you recommend for us to actually teach our youngsters?
There's loads of, actually, we've got our own, so through Just for Kids Law, we've got some videos on YouTube about, which I can send links through to Uncle Mark to circulate, about, you know, being in the police station and at court. There's an organisation called Stopwatch as well that's got loads of accessible resources. Yeah, there's quite a lot of information out there, so I can circulate. Like, you know, I can make sure that you have that for Uncle Mark to circulate.
Don't you provide that as a service, education, especially for youngsters?
Yeah, I do. We attend youth clubs and we talk at youth clubs and events and to groups of young people. We have a group of young people in our organisation who are our ambassadors, but we're based in London, who we use as youth trainers. We also train lawyers. So yeah, we do a lot of it ourselves. But if you, as parents, you want to look to resources, then there are certainly ones that I can direct you towards.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for everything you're doing, man.
Yeah, thank you so much, AIKA.
Thank you. Very informational.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, am I good to go now?
Yes, you
Jacob's getting
go.
very annoyed. He's been at this door once already.
Dinner's getting cold.
Go and have your dinner.
Okay. Well, take care.
No worries. Thanks
All right.
for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Bye. Bye.